We've started to see a shift in what's being taught in our schools. Today, I talked to educator and education evangelist Tanya Avrith from Adobe about the importance of teaching personal branding and visual storytelling within the education system. Welcome to Focus on K-12, EdTech and the Education Experience. I'm your host, Doug Konopelko, Education Strategist at CDWG. So let's dive in as we focus on K-12.
My name is Tanya Avrith, and I work at Adobe as their Education Evangelist. I am a teacher. I will always be a teacher first. I'm also the co-author of the Google Infused Classroom and the Microsoft Infused Classroom with Holly Clark, and a lifelong learner.
Great, thank you. I love that title, Education Evangelist. I think I'm gonna have to talk to CDW about making some switches, internally here. So, you've been an educator, you've been in and around school so much. What's one of the most important skills that we can be teaching our students today?
So I'm a huge proponent of having students learn how to be effective visual storytellers. A huge focus of a lot of my work has really surrounded around personal branding and teaching kids how to tell compelling stories. So definitely, a huge emphasis on visual storytelling.
Yeah, so maybe for the people that are listening, what goes into visual storytelling? What do you mean when you say visual storytelling?
So, our media that we consume is increasingly more and more visual, right? If you go anywhere right now and you're going to get information, you're going to be attracted to it first because there is some visual component. It may be a video, it may be a graphic. We spend a lot of time teaching kids the importance, and it's still important, of writing. We spend a huge amount of time in our English classes teaching how to construct a 5-paragraph persuasive essay. However, we spend very little time teaching students how to actually create visuals that will, I guess the word would be like, entice people to read what you're writing. And so this is a skill that's necessary in 2020 and on. As you all know, I mean, the way we consume any kind of news information is probably visual first, but we spend very little time teaching that to students. So that's kind of my passion and focus for many years as an educator.
What are some of the pieces, right, the different pieces that go into visual storytelling or into personal branding? What are some of the skills that we need to build in our students to get them there?
So when I'm teaching my students about being really effective visual storytellers, I spend time teaching them about how to create aesthetics. I have this really fun workshop and session that I do with students. It's a lesson called Friends Don't Let Friends Use Word Art. And in that session, I teach them the foundations of aesthetics and design, like using white space, visual breathing room, adding a grid to your work so that you can space out your visuals more effectively. So just from like a 2-dimensional element, like just having some foundational skills, I talk about noise versus your voice, your noise versus your message, like how you're getting across what you want to say visually. And this is something that we spend a tremendous amount of emphasis on. It's really what I assess when I'm looking at their work, but I foundationally explicitly share examples, and we really talk about what is effective when they're looking at design versus what isn't effective. And I think it's interesting because this is not necessarily something that you often hear about in schools, but something that is so important in any subject area.
Yeah, so I think that people, when they talk about something like personal branding or they talk about visual storytelling, they might say, oh, that's great. We can teach that in graphic design when the student gets into this CTE program in high school. But what you're saying here is that it goes beyond that, right? So is there a way that teachers in the core areas, right, those main subject areas we think about, when sort of the general public thinks about school. Is there a way for students and teachers in those areas to engage in this work?
Absolutely. You know, when I taught English, I've taught a variety of subject areas, and a huge emphasis in like updates in English curriculum require that you have an understanding of different genres and how to effectively communicate using different genres. And so video components, visual storytelling, those are part of the curriculum. So, I think that often they'll get overlooked, but they are still part of what we're supposed to be teaching our kids in the 21st century. So, having students articulate their understanding using a video to express, their what they're learning, that's a part of that. Having the students be able to use a visual to demonstrate their learning as an exit ticket, that is that is possible, and teaching them how to be more effective is a byproduct of them creating. So it doesn't take a lot to have a lesson with kids to say, let's look at some graphics, let's look at some ads, let's look at the way that these ads are communicating messages, and break that down and say, like, okay, let's apply that. And so that when we're creating, we can really get our message more effectively. I don't think that that's something that's completely separate from, teaching someone how to read, write, and understand different media in an English class. I think it's also really valuable to note that, one day our students are going to be Googled, not if, but when. And when they are, it's really important to understand how they're leveraging technology and social media to be the owners of their story. So I taught a class about a year and a half ago. It was a mandatory class called Personal Branding and Digital Communication. And in this course, there was a huge emphasis on really explicitly teaching kids how to tell visual stories. So that's kind of the beginnings of like my passion for this space. But as I mentioned, it's really not just dedicated to that one area of subject area. This is not just like one thing that you teach independently. This is definitely something that could be taught in many different areas.
Yeah, when we talk about media literacy and the ability to tease out what's real and what's fake and all these skills that 10 years ago we weren't really talking about nearly as much in our schools. And I think people are finally starting to come around, especially as we have all of these things going on in the world around us that are becoming more and more important. So this obviously is something that has been central to your work. Have you seen examples of your students that have gone through these courses that have come back maybe, or anything like that that have talked to you about the impact?
Oh my God, yes. So, this kind of teaching, this subject area is not necessarily something that is common for students to learn about. And honestly, even for adults, like when I'm having conversations about how to effectively communicate and using new hot channels to get your message across, even adults are like, wait, what? And I'm like, well, do you use hashtags as a search engine on Twitter? And they look at me like I have I have 4 eyes, but 10 eyes, because they're like, wait, what are you talking about? And I'm like, and this is the thing that I teach kids, right? So not only am I talking about aesthetics and design, but I'm also teaching kids about how to leverage different media to get their messages across. And one of those topics that I teach really come back to the idea of harnessing hashtags to connect and network. And so in my class, I have my students create their profile for Twitter. They get on Twitter. It's mandatory in the class that I taught. And they create a portfolio that is attached to their Twitter profile. And I teach them how powerful it can be if they start to connect with the colleges that they're interested in going into. And then I have them become like Sherlock Holmes, and I have them start researching on the colleges, the hashtags that people are using. I have them start looking up, like I have them literally go into programs of study and look at professors and look at if the professors and Google them and then see, are they on Twitter. Like, this sounds crazy, but like, I'm teaching them how to actually like stalk their professors or future professors, but in a positive way, because what they start doing is they start understanding who are the people that are part of the program. What are they talking about? They start following them. They start looking at the hashtags that they're using. Then they start, if they're really like, and I hope that they are, I always teach my students to like, to share things, to ask questions, to tweet to these people. And, when you're a college professor and you have a high school student who's interested, that's really cool. Like, that people take notice. And so I teach them to connect, to share, to ask questions, to look at those hashtags, to start becoming part of the conversation now. And also to start curating their accomplishments through Twitter. And I tell them, like, if you're Googled and you put your Twitter handle there and you say you did XYZ, but you're actually showcasing that and you're sharing it, and you want to get noticed, this is the way to do it in 2020 and beyond. And last year, I started working at Adobe last year, but that a year and a half ago I was teaching. And my kids were still at the school that I was teaching at. So I was in the car line, and one of my students from the year before, who is now a senior, saw me, and he came up to my car and he was like, "Miss Avrith, I have to tell you, thank you so much for teaching me about the power of Twitter." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, what happened?" And he's like, "Well, I decided that I'm going to go to Western University in London, Ontario." And I was like, "Wait, what?" We're in Florida. And I was like, "Why?" He was an international student, and he's studying engineering, and he wants to go into, I think it was like aerospace engineering, or I can't remember, but something really not my alley. And he was like, "Well, I started following all these different universities, and I realized that they have an apprenticeship, like internship program." And he's like, "This is such a great program, and I would have never known about it had you not told me about, going on Twitter and really researching that way." And I was like, "Oh my God." And that's just one example. I have students that they use Twitter to connect to scouts. One of my students, Christian, is a soccer player, and he was a freshman. He started tweeting, and he is so connected now with all these different colleges, and now he's a junior. So, just that ability to like put yourself out there, communicate effectively, then leverage hashtags, leverage social media is a skill that I think is so under taught.
Yeah, so in addition to Twitter for getting the message out there, what are some resources that teachers, students, leaders can leverage to help them start telling their story?
Well, Adobe right now has built up these incredible media literacy lessons. And so if you go to the Education Exchange and you look at the K-12 resources and also the distance learning resources, we have teamed up with 35 master teachers from around the world to create 400 media ready lessons that are cross curricular. And that's a great place to start teaching about having students tell more visual stories. And they're also curriculum aligned, so you're not veering from your assignment. So definitely start there. That's a great resource.
Excellent. And what about creating the actual story itself? What are a couple things we could use?
So I'm obviously going to be a little biased, but I'm obsessed with Adobe Spark because it's just such an easy, quick tool to get started with creating visuals, videos, and web stories, visual stories. And it's most districts have it, and you don't even know that you have it. You just go into it, you log in, and there's a way to log in as a teacher or student. Click on that because you probably have an account and you didn't even know. We have so many accounts with so many districts, and it's completely free. It's COPA and FERPA compliant. So definitely check that out. And if you don't have it with your district, just go to spark.adobe.com/edu. And there's different ways that you can get accounts for your students. So yeah, check it out.
Tanya, thank you so much for telling some of your story, right, about your personal experiences with this.
Oh, thank you for having me, Doug. And thank you to all the teachers that are literally just killing it and crushing it right now. My heart goes out to you so much. Keep up the good work.
Thanks for joining us today on Focus on K-12 EdTech and the Education Experience. If you enjoyed today's show, please feel free to like, subscribe, and click the little bell so that you get notified whenever we post a new episode. Or reach out to me on Twitter @dkonopelko. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time as we focus on K-12.